Let's dive right into this explainer on the Cuban Missile Crisis.
13 days. That is exactly how long the closest the world has ever come to complete nuclear annihilation actually lasted.
Section 1. Brink of nuclear war, the ultimate standoff.
So, October 1962. The US and the Soviet Union are locked in a geopolitical standoff that literally brings humanity right to the absolute edge. But you gotta wonder, how exactly did an island in the Caribbean almost trigger World War III? To really understand this, we need to bypass all the myths and look directly at the specific actions and reactions that built this massive global powder keg.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Cold War context, action and reaction.
Now, what's really fascinating here is that this crisis didn't actually start in Cuba. It was more like a deadly, high-stakes game of global nuclear chess. By 1961, the United States had already positioned Thor and Jupiter nuclear missiles in England, Italy, and Turkey. Those were within immediate striking range of Moscow. So, in response, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev decided to perfectly match that exact threat right in the Western Hemisphere, proposing to put R-12 medium-range ballistic missiles in Cuba. And beyond just the global posturing, we've got some very real, highly localized triggers. The U.S. had just trained a paramilitary force of Cuban expatriates for the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion in April 1961. Following that massive failure, the U.S. kept the pressure up with the Cuban project, which was basically an ongoing campaign of sabotage. Driven by the very real threat of a full-scale mainland invasion from the U.S., Fidel Castro and Khrushchev made a mutual deal in July 1962 to put Soviet nukes in Cuba for protection.
Section 3. Discovery and the blockade. The U-2 intelligence.
So the real turning point is how the U.S. actually uncovered this massive, totally secret deployment just 90 miles off its shores. A U.S. U-2 spy plane managed to capture undeniable photographic evidence of widespread construction. We're talking surface-to-air missile sites and medium-range ballistic missiles that were capable of hitting much of the eastern United States in just a matter of minutes. At that point, the secret was officially out. President John F. Kennedy immediately pulled together his closest advisors, forming the XCOM. Now, a lot of people in that room were pushing hard for a direct airstrike, maybe even a full invasion. But Kennedy opted for a slightly less aggressive, though incredibly tense path. He ordered a naval quarantine to stop any further Soviet shipments. And the wording here is absolutely crucial. Kennedy deliberately used the word quarantine instead of blockade, simply because a blockade is legally recognized as a formal act of war.
Moving on to Section 4. 13 days of tension, the ticking clock. The escalation from here was just incredibly rapid. You have the U-2 photos being reviewed on October 16th, and then Kennedy is addressing the nation on television just a week later. By October 24th, Soviet vessels are sailing dangerously close to the American ships, enforcing that quarantine line. Meanwhile, the U.S. military is rapidly raising its alert level, actively, literally preparing for a potential nuclear conflict. The tension at this point was practically suffocating. In a frantic, behind-the-scenes effort to avoid a total disaster, Khrushchev writes a deeply personal letter to Kennedy. He says, "Mr. President, we and you ought not now to pull on the ends of the rope in which you have tied the knot of war, because the more the two of us pull, the tighter that knot will be tied." He's openly acknowledging the terrifying, basically uncontrollable forces their countries now had at their fingertips.
Section 5. The Secret Resolution Back-Channel Deal. So, completely behind closed doors, away from all the public posturing, a secret deal is hastily hammered out. And it requires massive, highly calculated concessions from both sides. Step 1, Khrushchev would publicly dismantle and remove his missiles from Cuba. In exchange for Step 2, Kennedy promises the U.S. won't invade Cuba. But Step 3, that was the absolute linchpin. It was a completely unpublicized agreement where the U.S. secretly withdrew its Jupiter missiles from Turkey and Italy. So while the public saw a massive Soviet retreat, the reality was a deeply pragmatic, high-stakes compromise.
Finally, Section 6. Legacy of the crisis, the aftermath. The immediate crisis was successfully averted, sure, but those 13 days permanently altered the entire trajectory of the Cold War. For one, a direct nuclear hotline was established right between Washington and Moscow just to prevent future accidental escalations. But there were huge political costs, too. The perceived humiliation of retreating from Cuba played a massive part in Khrushchev's fall from power by October 1964. And beyond that, it drove the Soviet Union to relentlessly pursue total nuclear parity with the U.S., cementing that terrifying doctrine of mutually assured destruction for decades to come. As we wrap up this explainer, you really have to look at the world today and ask yourself, if October 1962 was the closest we have ever come to the absolute brink, are the mechanisms of global nuclear deterrence actually a guarantee of enduring peace, or are they really just a delayed fuse?